What is the cost of lies? It's not that we'll mistake them for the truth. The real danger is that if we hear enough lies, then we no longer recognize the truth at all. What can we do then? What else is left but to abandon even the hope of truth and content ourselves instead with stories?
Adaptation in the theory of adaptation is described as follows. These three variations of adaptation can be broken down further. Adaptations can be seen as a product, process of creation, and a process of reception. Adaptation as a product involves a significant shift of a core feature, for example, a shift of medium, genre, or point of view, and is usually called transcoding. Adaptation as a process of creation revolves around both reinterpretation and then recreation, and is being called both appropriation and salvaging, depending on your perspective. Finally, process of reception involves intertextuality. We experience adaptations as adaptations that palimpsest through our memory of other works that resonate through repetition with variation. Both case studies are clearly adaptation as product. They are completed audiovisual texts that represent historical events in a distinct medium, film and TV. In Oppenheimer's case specifically, it is based on the biography American Prometheus, involves a shift of medium. They are also processes of creation. Nolan and Mazin reinterpret and recreate historical records, biographies, and testimonies into dramatic narratives. They appropriate and salvage American and Soviet history through a distinct lens. Lastly, they are processes of repetition. Viewers debate the accuracy, omissions, and dramatizations. Viewers bring their historical knowledge, sociological biases, and cultural context to interpret them. A Japanese viewer could watch Oppenheimer differently to an American, and a Ukrainian viewer could bring a unique personal knowledge that a British viewer would lack to Chernobyl.
Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
I think those calculations, we thought we might start a chain reaction that would destroy the entire world. I remember as well what happened. Absolutely devastating.
Minia and Panaccia argue that all major theoretical and pragmatic concerns we have for adaptation can be raised with regard to the biopic too, be these related to the problematically fuzzy concept of fidelity, authenticity, source versus target, or other ontologically oriented debates about such productions. With biopics, balancing fidelity and authenticity with creative expression is of vital importance. Even before a biography is adapted onto screen, there's a blurred line between fiction and reality. As the written biography, often placed on the borderline of history and literature, screen biography also mixes the factual and the fictitious. How do you evaluate history and adapt it in a faithful way? Or is that line of thinking redundant when it comes to history being subjective itself?
I think, it's redundant in that, history is different from different perspectives.
Yeah.
And it might align that the historical film is faithful to one particular culture's understanding of those texts or those events, but very often it's still shaped not just by the moment that it's adapting, but in the moment that it's being adapted within. Historical biopics, for example, a lot of focus then comes onto the actor playing that role.
Yes.
And what the presence of that body does to the text. So rather than it just being purely a historical representation, it becomes reshaped and the meanings are altered by the choice of actor.
Nolan makes key omissions. Most notably, he doesn't show the bombings of Hiroshima or Nagasaki. This was deliberate. In interviews, he explained that since Oppenheimer didn't witness the bombings directly, the film remains anchored in his psychological experience. The facts are there, but the interpretation is everything. Oppenheimer uses the full cinematic arsenal: IMAX photography, non-linear editing, and aggressive sound mix to place us inside the protagonist's mind. Unlike Chernobyl, which externalizes its terror, Oppenheimer internalizes it. Guilt, ambition, paranoia, these are the historical forces rendered most visibly. And it's kind of like if you see a big actor like Cillian Murphy within the role of Oppenheimer, the intertextuality and just like thinking about what he's done before.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, same with Robert Downey Jr., who can bring coming back from Tony Stark and Iron Man, coming into this antagonist in Oppenheimer.
Yeah, exactly. So the actors will bring the traces of the roles that they've done before, and also their kind of star image kind of beyond that. So we know Cillian Murphy is an Irish actor, and Robert Downey Jr. is American. It's a film about the American impact of nuclear weapons, and so you've got this really complicated approach.
The film sparked debate. Was it morally responsible to center Oppenheimer while leaving Japanese victims off screen? Did Nolan over-intellectualize a tragedy? Yet these criticisms reveal how audiences still expect historical adaptations to show everything. Nolan's choice not to reflects a very different philosophy of adaptation, one rooted in narrative perspective. Oppenheimer enters a lineage of films about scientific hubris, from Doctor Strangelove to The Social Network. It also speaks to American myth-making, reinterpreting patriotism, genius, and national guilt through the lens of one man's rise and fall.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened. The Soviet version is this. One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged, and there is speculation in Moscow that people were injured and may have died. The Soviets may have been fairly quick to acknowledge the accident because evidence in the form of mild nuclear radiation had already reached beyond the Soviet borders to Scandinavia. We begin with ABC's Dean Reynolds.
To them, the just world is a sane world. That's the power. There was nothing sane about Chernobyl.
Craig Mazin's Chernobyl is often praised for how realistic it is, but it is not a documentary. It blends fact and fiction to dramatize the 1986 nuclear disaster in the Soviet Union. The series draws on official reports, interviews, and survivor accounts, but also invents characters, combines timelines, and rewrites dialogue. Mazin himself has said that his goal was to be emotionally true, even if that meant deviating from the literal events. For example, the character Ulana Komyak never existed. She is a composite of dozens of real scientists, yet her presence helps dramatize systemic resistance to truth and science. Rather than adhering to strict factual accuracy, Chernobyl commits to a deeper kind of truth, one that captures the feel of systemic failure, moral compromise, and bureaucratic silence.
There's a history that gets taught in schools, and there is the way in which it's reported in the news media. And Tom Leach talks about the fact that, newspapers and news itself is an adaptation of the events around that we kind of encounter. And this is, I think, history is a form of adaptation. I think Lawrence Rohr is someone also that talks about this as well, adaptation scholar. And I think then this idea of authority, we usually ascribe it to something that's kind of fixed and permanent, or something that has kind of creative control. And history isn't fixed or permanent, because we know we've reassessed those periods of history and rethought them. And that creative control that comes with a film or television series, it's not as simple as saying it's the director, it's the screenwriter, it's
Yeah.
the actor. I think it's a collaborative element. I mean, Jack Boozer talks about this in his discussion of authorship and adaptation, that he says, we should be considering the screenwriter as the ultimate authority over the text, because
Right.
they're the ones that kind of write it.
Strained colour palette, haunting score, and tight framing enhance the feeling of dread and claustrophobia. The medium of television, spread over 5 episodes, allows the story to unfold like a slow-burning tragedy, each episode deepening the emotional impact. Being a limited TV miniseries, Chernobyl can explore the events of the actual historical moment in a way that is longer than a Hollywood film but shorter than multi-seasonal television, which could have dragged out events and may have required more dramatisation. It could be argued that Chernobyl is too documentary-like, and some may have mistaken it as documentary or docuseries. This could be an indication of how powerfully adaptation can blur the line between fiction and reality. Chernobyl draws on Cold War imagery and horror conventions. It echoes early nuclear dramas and disaster films. It positions itself against romanticized or heroic retellings of crisis. Here, heroism is rare, truth-telling is costly, and mistakes are fatal. What ethical responsibilities do filmmakers have when adapting sensitive or traumatic historical events?
That's a hard question.
Yeah. Or do they not have any at all, is it?
I mean, do they? I don't know, because if you think about the kinds of things that we've made entertainment out of, you look at the whole true crime genre, for example,
Yeah.
that's just kind of monetizing other people's pain.
Yeah.
And in some ways, you could say that films about history very often do kind of exploit people's pain and suffering and tell it. But usually it's framed as a kind of public service or public good, that they're kind of recounting and documenting the events of the past to spread it to a wider audience, right? That historical films, it's a sense of making history more accessible, and it might drive people to go and look up the real story. So again, that status as adaptation of historical films is always usually foregrounded and usually known, because audiences will watch the film and then go and look up the facts, even if they do assume that most of it is real. If you go onto Google and type in a search term about a historical film, you'll usually come up with did these things really happen in Chernobyl? These really things, and so much so that with The Crown, they had to put the disclaimer at the front of The Crown saying this is fictional TV series, because people were assuming that all these things happened. But obviously, if we just sort of made versions of history that were true to life, as it were, it wouldn't fit the dramatic demands of the fictional form.
History, for the most part, is subjective. This issue of adapting history does not lie with the adaptation's accuracy, but instead with its perspective. Of course, adaptations that highlight inaccurate information must be scrutinized, but Oppenheimer omitting the consequences of the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in favor of exploring another perspective is not a bad thing, as long as it, and other adaptations like it, do not glorify issues such as the deaths of Japanese civilians in this case. Both Chernobyl and Oppenheimer adapt more than facts. They adapt ethical questions. Who gets to be the centre of history, the centre of the story? What is the cost of truth? And how should storytellers approach the pain of others? Martin chose to show the physical suffering of radiation exposure to honour those who died. Nolan chose to leave some things unseen, to avoid speaking for the victims. These aren't just narrative decisions, they're moral ones. Historical dramas like Valkyrie or Operation Finale are often criticised for flattening complexity, simplifying motives, inserting Hollywood tropes, and centering American heroes in foreign stories. Chernobyl and Oppenheimer resist that impulse, even as they still reflect the biases of their creators and cultures.